It's 5 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us on Arirang News for our coverage of Election Day as South Koreans choose a new president. I'm Devin Whiting. In just a few hours, voting will be over in South Korea's presidential election, and the ballot boxes will be moved to the counting stations. Turnout is key in this election, now at the end of a dramatic race that's down to two main frontrunners, Lee Jae-myung of the Democratic Party of Korea, and on the conservative side, Yoon of the People Power Party. We'll start by taking a look at how many people have voted so far, and for that, we have our Eun-ji at the National Election Commission. Eun-ji, you've been there since this morning. How's the voter turnout looking now?
Well, Devin, I'm at the National Election Commission, where officials have been keeping track of the voter turnout throughout the day, as you can see behind me. As of 4 p.m., with only 2 hours left until polling stations close for regular voters, the turnout was 71.1%. This includes early voting and overseas voting ballots. The figure is some 10 percentage points higher than at the same time in the previous presidential election in 2017. Jeollanam, the province located southwest of Seoul, has the highest turnout of 77.3%. So far, out of around 44 million South Koreans registered to vote in this election, more than 31 million have cast their votes. The two-day early voting period held last week ended with a record-high turnout of almost 37%. This is 10 percentage points higher than in the previous election, which led to a final turnout of more than 77%. So all eyes are on whether or not the turnout this time will exceed 80%. If that happens, it would be the first time in 25 years.
Well, Eun-ji, the figures you've got certainly do indicate a high level of enthusiasm and interest in this election. When will the votes be counted? And the big question, when do we find out who the next president will be?
Well, as soon as the voting ends at 7:30 p.m., the ballot boxes will be completely sealed and transported to the counting stations, escorted by the police. The Election Commission said the vote counting is expected to begin at around 8:10 p.m. and said the early results will likely come out at around midnight. The final result will probably be available at about 8 a.m. tomorrow morning, and the Election Commission will hold a meeting at 10 a.m. to certify the winner. That's all I have for now. Back to you, Devin.
All right, we'll be looking forward to checking with you again later in the evening. Thank you, Eun-ji, with that report. And South Korea has now held several elections in the pandemic. This time around, there are a number of by-elections, too. Our Kim Yeon-sung is at a polling station in downtown Seoul. Yeon-sung, so tell us, where are you and what's going on there?
Right, Devin. So I'm at the third polling station in Pyeongchang-dong in Seoul's Jongno-gu District. And what's significant about this polling station itself is that right now, at the moment, there are two elections being held, one for the presidential polls and the other for the local by-elections to fill up a seat at the parliamentary. Jongno-gu has been traditionally known as District Number 1 of South Korea's politics, and it holds historical significance as the country's political capital. This area is also regarded as a key battleground district among politicians, so naturally, this area's constituents are typically known to have a stronger interest in politics and are typically known to be more outspoken. And as if to demonstrate this, when the polling station here opened its doors this morning at 6 a.m., there was already a long line of people waiting out in the dark and out in the cold to vote. I've talked to some of them about how they felt about voting in two elections at once. Take a listen, Devin.
I feel like the by-election has a more direct impact on me rather than the presidential election. I also feel closer to the by-election candidate because it's someone who I've been following for a long time.
All the attention went straight to the presidential candidate, so there was less information about the by-election candidates out there.
Well, Yeon-sung, you've been out there in the thick of it since 6 o'clock this morning, as you said, when voting kicked off, and we're now at the tail end of it. It'll soon be time to vote for people who are infected with COVID-19 and those who are in isolation. Tell us about that.
Right, so there's only about an hour left for regular voters to vote, and after that there's an extra hour and a half reserved for COVID-19 infected patients or those in isolation. So there are around 880,000 people in isolation. So it's become one of the most important tasks of the National Election Commission and the health authorities to safely secure all of their votes so that everyone can safely exercise their fundamental democratic rights. Most voters confirmed or suspected to have COVID-19 will be able to leave home at 5:50 p.m. unless they live in remote villages with few means of transportation where it might take them extra time to get to the nearest polling booth. In that case, voters can leave 20 minutes early at 5:30 p.m. This time, the NEC is making sure that there are no doubts about safety or mismanaging the votes. First, regular voters and those isolating will be clearly separated by time, and COVID-19 voters will be allowed to put their ballots straight into the ballot box rather than in a separate container. Devin, I'm going to be here until voting kicks off for COVID-19 patients, so I'll be back with more updates. Back to you, Devin.
All right, Kim Yeon-sung reporting there from downtown Seoul. Now let's turn our attention to the presidential campaigns themselves. For this, we have our campaign reporters who've been following the race for us since the very start, Kim Do-yeon and Lee Kyung-eun. They're at the party headquarters of the two frontrunners. First, let's go to Kim Do-yeon, who's been following the candidate for the ruling Democratic Party of Korea, Lee Jae-myung. So Do-yeon, how's it looking over there, and where is Lee Jae-myung at the moment?
Good afternoon, Devin. I'm at the campaign headquarters of the ruling Democratic Party of Korea, where the members of the campaign are slowly arriving to watch the election unfold. Now, since early in the morning, media crew have settled in to capture the important moments for the day, but right now, Lee Jae-myung is at home. He's expected to come out in the evening once polling closes and a clearer picture of the results emerges. A few hours ago, he reached out to the public through Facebook, thanking everyone who supported him over the past 251 days since he announced his run for presidency. Also on his social media, he said a few hundred votes could decide the election and urged his supporters to help him convince others. Similar to what he has been saying in the build-up to the election day. Take a listen.
Dear citizens, it's a tight and desperate election until the end. Many are doing all they can right now. Thank you very much. I will repay all of you with a victory.
In the meantime, his party members say that the tide has been turning in their favor. Yesterday, we heard the chief of the election committee for the party say that he saw Lee Jae-myung possibly taking the lead in the capital region. Now, Lee Jae-myung did put a lot of effort into turning things around in the capital region, as the majority of his 80 rallies over the past 22 days were in Seoul, Incheon, or Gyeonggi-do province. The party also has forecast that undecided women voters in their 20s and 30s are shifting towards candidate Lee, which will ultimately lead to a win for Lee by a slim margin. Devin?
All right, Kim Do-yeon there following the Democratic Party and their candidate. Now to Lee Kyung-eun, who's standing by at the People Power Party headquarters. Kyung-eun, obviously such a big day for the people there. How is the party spending election day, and how about the candidate himself, Yoon Sung-yeol?
Well, Devin, things are starting to get busier as we're inching closer to 7 p.m. That's when party leaders will come here to watch the results of the exit polls. In the meantime, Yoon Sung-yeol has been staying at home, and he will not be here until late at night when we start to get a clearer picture of the outcome. 2 times a day, Yoon posted on social media encouraging people to vote, saying vote for change. In his most recent post, he said turnout so far is not as high as expected, and that each vote is desperately needed. Turnout is also what he really stressed last night in his final campaign speech. Take a listen.
This marathon is nearing an end. I urge you to show your encouragement and overwhelming support so I can be first over the finish line.
Well, the party remains optimistic. It said voter turnout so far is now lower than in any previous election, but it did stress on the need for a final surge to secure a safe victory. And for that, the party has been making final phone calls and sending text messages urging people to vote. And throughout the day, it has also been encouraging voters' participation through its YouTube channel. Well, that's all for now, but I will bring more updates in our later newscast. Back to you, Devin.
All right, we'll be looking forward to it. Lee Kyung-eun reporting there. Thank you for that. And South Korea's presidential election is getting widespread coverage overseas. In China, the Global Times published an editorial today saying the results of South Korea's presidential election will determine the direction of Korean Peninsula issues and Seoul-Beijing relations. It noted that the two countries' trade volume has risen six-fold compared to 30 years ago and said their bilateral relations should move forward, not backwards. Japan's Kyodo News also said election results will affect Seoul's ties with Tokyo and ties between the two Koreas. And the Nihon Keizai Shimbun pointed to Korean millennials and Generation Z as a major factor in the election. The BBC and The Guardian have published stories about gender issues in the election, saying the candidates have tried to reach out to young male voters and discussing the use and abuse in the election of the concept of feminism. Now, the new administration, whichever candidate wins, will have a lot on its plate in terms of foreign policy, including the stall in relations with North Korea and maintaining and strengthening the alliance with the United States. Peace on the Korean Peninsula will no doubt remain goal number one, but experts say the war in Ukraine will make the diplomatic and security agenda more complicated. Kim Da-mi explains.
The peace process on the Korean Peninsula may be another wild ride for the new administration, with the possibility of a new Cold War dominating internationally. Laying solid momentum for North Korea's complete denuclearization will also remain top of the agenda for Seoul, but this time with an additional variable, the Russia-Ukraine crisis.
It is possible that North Korea may have given up on its willingness to denuclearize while watching the Ukraine crisis. So the situation could be an opportunity for the North to solidify its will to keep nuclear weapons.
Instead, the value and the importance of the South Korea-US alliance is bound to become more significant, as resolving North Korea issues through Seoul-Washington ties will highly likely be the go-to solution. But experts say such a plan will only work if the Biden administration listens to the new administration.
The U.S. needs to respect South Korea's opinions when it comes to issues on the Korean Peninsula, such as economic cooperation between the two Koreas and reunions of war-separated families.
Seoul-Beijing relations may become trickier in the new administration amid a new Cold War structure that will no doubt focus on keeping both China and Russia in check. But experts point out that South Korea-China cooperation will remain essential for improving the situation on the Korean Peninsula. The same applies to ties between South Korea and Japan. However, a rocky road is expected, with Tokyo refusing to look squarely at history and show a humble attitude over its wartime past. In addition, managing people's sentiment over this tragic history will remain another crucial task for the new government. Kim Da-mi, Arirang News.
항상 청년 일자리 얘기하는데 그냥 일자리를 얼마큼 만들겠다 이것만 있고 구체적으로 말하는 게 없잖아요. 그래서 뭐 어떻게 어떤 식으로 좀 만들어 주겠다. 아니면 솔직히 일을 할 곳은 많은데 사람들이 꺼려서 안 가기 싫은 거잖아요. 그래서 그런 곳에 복지를 어떻게 늘려주겠다. 뭐 이런 식으로 좀 구체적으로 해줬으면 좋겠어요.
근무 형태가 여러 개가 있잖아요. 그 여러 분야에서 열심히 일하고 있는 그 직원분들, 이제 그 직장인 분들이 억울하게 그 극단적인 선택을 하지 않고 좀 그렇게 되는 부분들에 대해서 그냥 개의치 않게 생각하는 게 아니라 어떻게 진심으로 나아가야 이게 개선이 될지 생각해 주셨으면 합니다.
저희도 예전처럼 이 공항이 사람이 붐비고 뭐 여행도 자유롭게 다닐 수 있고 마스크 벗는 거는 뭐 힘들겠지만 그래도 이제 직장인들도 공항에 일하는 모든 직장인들, 항공사 직원들 다 정상 출근을 할 수 있게.
일단 집값 문제가 저는 되게 심각하다고 생각하고요. 그래서 집값 문제가 이제 결혼이나 아이를 낳는 데에도 문제가 있다고 생각해서 그 부분이 꼭 개선됐으면 좋겠습니다.
저희 세대가 저희가 받는 급여로는 내 집 마련이 어렵다 보니까 일단 금리적인 측면이나 이제 대출 부분에서는 조금 규제가 완화되었으면 좋겠습니다.
나라를 잘 이끌어주시고 청년들이 살아가기 좋은 세상이 되었으면 좋겠습니다.
요즘 갈등이 너무 심각해지고 있다고 체감을 하고 있는데요. 사회 갈등을 좀 봉합하고 갈라치기 정치가 아니라 통합의 정치로 나아갈 수 있는 그런 운영이 되었으면.
청년들이 불평불만이 많은 것처럼 보이지만 되게 공정하고 그런 규칙이 지켜지면 불안한 것도 다 견딜 수 있는 그런 세대라고 생각을 해요. 그래서 잘 부탁드립니다.
The number of new COVID-19 cases in South Korea rose today to an all-time high of more than 340,000. That's almost at the peak the authorities have said they expect to see this month. Some rules and procedures are going to change now. For example, coronavirus pills will be more widely available, and some rules will be relaxed on testing. Choi Min-jung reports.
South Korea reported a record-breaking 342,446 new cases of COVID-19 on Wednesday. It's the first time the country has seen daily infections surpass the 300,000 mark. The daily caseload increased by a whopping 140,000 in just one day. Including the latest figures, the country's total caseload has now surpassed 5.2 million, or roughly 1 out of every 10 people in South Korea. The country passed the 4 million mark last weekend, and it only took 4 days to reach the 5 million mark. Health experts say the peak phase of Korea's Omicron wave may have started this Wednesday and is set to last over the next 2 weeks, with cases hovering between 250,000 to 350,000 a day. Therefore, they say the country must prepare itself for a surge in severely ill patients at the end of March or in early April. Starting Wednesday, general hospitals, psychiatric hospitals, and rehabilitation medical centers will be allowed to prescribe Pfizer's Paxlovid to COVID-19 patients as well. Up until now, the oral treatment could only be prescribed by medical institutions, local clinics, and hospitals that were designated to treat COVID-19 patients recovering at home. From Thursday, inbound travelers will no longer have to get 2 PCR tests on the day of arrival and the 7th day after arriving. PCR tests will only be required on the day of arrival, and on the 7th day, people will be asked to take the rapid antigen test instead. Measures have also been eased for people working at nursing facilities. Those who have gotten their 4th shots will no longer have to take regular PCR tests twice a week. The move comes in a bid to increase efficiency, with demand for tests increasing due to the rapid spread of the virus. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
With the U.S. having decided to ban Russian oil and gas because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Moscow has responded with some sanctions of its own. President Vladimir Putin says Russia is going to cut the U.S. off from certain other commodities it needs. The invasion of Ukraine, meanwhile, is leading to a refugee crisis of historic proportions. Yoon reports.
A few hours after the U.S. announced new economic sanctions against Russia, Moscow responded with sanctions of its own. Russian President Vladimir Putin on Tuesday said Moscow would ban the exports of certain commodities and raw materials. Details on exactly which products will be banned have not yet been revealed, but they will be announced in the next 2 days. The U.S. said on Tuesday that it would ban imports of Russian oil, natural gas, and coal in a bid to deprive Russia of funds to finance its invasion of Ukraine.
We're banning all imports of Russian oil and gas and energy. That means Russian oil will no longer be acceptable at U.S. ports, and the American people will deal another powerful blow to Putin's war machine.
Following Biden's announcement, the UK proposed phasing out Russian oil imports by the end of 2022. The European Commission also shared plans to reduce EU member states' dependency on Russian energy sources. They proposed cutting Russian oil imports by 2/3. Pundits forecast that the sanctions and Russia's export bans will mean that households around the world will suffer from a spike in wholesale prices. Russia is the world's second-largest exporter of crude oil and a major exporter of grains and metals. Despite the sanctions, Russia has not stepped back from its invasion of Ukraine. Moscow did, however, offer another temporary ceasefire from 10 a.m. Wednesday local time to provide humanitarian corridors for Ukrainian civilians in Kyiv and 4 other cities to safely escape. This follows the first successful evacuation through an agreed corridor on Tuesday, when some 5,000 people fled from the city of Sumy. The UN says Russia's invasion has caused the fastest-growing refugee crisis in Europe since World War II. As of now, more than 2 million people have left Ukraine. Yoon, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, Fitch Ratings has cut its credit rating for Russia even further into junk territory, warning that a sovereign default is imminent. Russia was downgraded to Fitch's second lowest rating, a single C, because of the expected effects of the international sanctions and trade restrictions. Fitch said if there are more sanctions that limit energy trade, then Russia could end up having to default on its debts. At Standard & Poor's, Russia's rating is at the third lowest level. Other major rating agencies have also slashed Moscow's credit following its invasion of Ukraine. S&P has the country 3 levels above a default score, while its rating at Moody's is not at the lowest tier, but is also rated as junk. 7 North Koreans, 6 of them soldiers, have been voluntarily repatriated after they were taken into South Korean custody on Tuesday when their boat crossed over the maritime border. The Defense Ministry in Seoul made the announcement earlier today, saying they had crossed the border by mistake and because of mechanical problems with their boat. All 7 of them reportedly expressed a strong desire to go back. Their boat crossed the northern limit line on Tuesday at about 9:30 a.m. They and their vessel were detained and brought to Pyeongdo Island for investigation.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. They say on International Women's Day you give bread and roses. Unfortunately for many women around the world, they were instead met with violence. Over in Turkey, riot police clashed with protesters who gathered in Istanbul to celebrate the day, as police used pepper spray to disperse a crowd of several thousand in the city's center. Istanbul's governor's office said Monday that it would not allow marches, protesters, or press statements to mark the event in the area. However, women still gathered despite the heavy police presence, leading to scuffles and riot police using their shields to push them back. Meanwhile, over in Sudan, protesters used International Women's Day to rally against military rule, and they were met with tear gas as they approached the presidential palace. Women's rights groups had called for the protest, along with other organizations, as they have been holding rallies since the military took power in October. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps said Tuesday that it has successfully put a second military satellite into orbit. The Noor-2 was placed into orbit 500 kilometers above Earth and follows their first military satellite, which was launched in April 2020. The Noor-1 was placed in orbit 425 kilometers above the Earth's surface. The announcement comes after talks were held in Vienna to revive an agreement restraining Iran's nuclear program. Experts say putting a second satellite in space would be a major advance for Iran's military, raising concerns about the country's nuclear and missile programs. Flood warnings continued across Australia's east coast on Tuesday, while tens of thousands of Sydney residents fled their homes overnight as torrential rains slammed the region once again. The country's eastern rivers were close to overflowing following record downpours over the recent weeks, which cut off towns and swept away farms, livestock, and roads. Meanwhile, the death toll from the week-long floods rose to 20 after the bodies of a man and a woman were discovered in floodwaters. The National Weather Bureau warned of a tough 48 hours ahead for Sydney, with 60,000 people subject to evacuation orders. Batgirl and Flash were among thousands of superheroes seen at the 10th edition of the Middle East Film and Comic Convention in Abu Dhabi. Known as the biggest pop culture show in the region, it brought together nearly 22,000 people for the 3-day event. Among the celebrity guests attending the event were Charles Martinet, the voice of Mario in the Super Mario video game series, as well as actress Ming-Na, who voiced Mulan from the animated Disney movie. But most importantly, for comic fans, it was a chance to dress up as their favorite characters. Lee Jae-myung, Arirang News.
And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. Do stay tuned to Arirang News throughout the day for the latest on South Korea's presidential election. Our coverage will continue through the night and into tomorrow as the votes are tallied and looking ahead at what the new administration will mean for South Korea and the world. More news coming up at 7 p.m. Korea time.
내 중심으로 강강 쏠래